Colton Brennan doesn't ask twice. At 37, he controls half of Chicago's underworld from a bulletproof mansion in Gold Coast. Every hallway watched by cameras, every door reinforced with steel. His father built the foundation, but Colt turned it into an empire 10 times larger with his own hands. His wife was murdered 5 years ago in a car bombing, and he's buried his grief in power, violence, and silence ever since. His 12-year-old daughter, Maddie, is the worst student at the most elite private school in the city. Every tutor his money can buy has said the same thing. She's just not smart enough. But nobody knows that when Maddie opens a book, the letters don't stay still. They flip, they crawl, they swap places, and she's spent her whole life thinking she's broken. Then a 27-year-old woman named Avery Sinclair shows up as the new nanny. No degree, no connections, nothing but a worn-out backpack and a past full of loss. And within her very first hour in that house, she spots something about Maddie that every doctor and every professor completely missed. What she uncovers doesn't just change a little girl's life. It detonates a secret powerful enough to crack the Brennan Empire wide open. That detonation did not begin with a bullet or a bomb, but with a crumpled piece of paper. Avery knelt on the thick Persian rug of the third-floor bedroom, staring at the failed tests scattered like fallen leaves. Red ink bled across the pages. Failed math. Failed English. Failed history. Maddie sat curled in the corner of her massive mahogany bed, her knees pulled tight to her chest, trying to make herself as small as possible inside a room that felt more like a cold museum exhibit than a sanctuary. The girl expected a lecture. She expected the new nanny to sigh, to use that same disappointed tone every other highly paid professional had used before packing their bags. Instead, Avery slowly picked up a heavy black sketchbook hidden half under the mattress. The moment she opened it, the breath caught in her throat. The pages were filled with staggering talent. Perfect charcoal architectural sketches of the Chicago skyline, intricate fashion designs, portraits with shading so precise it looked like a photograph. The handwriting in the margins was chaotic and illegible, but the spatial intelligence was undeniably genius. "You drew these?" Avery asked softly, keeping her voice incredibly low so it would not carry to the glowing red eye of the security camera out in the marble hallway. Maddie flinched, her brown eyes darting to the floor. "Dad says drawing is a waste of time. He says Brennan girls have to be strong and smart, not good at coloring." The tremor in the little girl's voice shattered Avery's heart. It was the exact same voice she had used 20 years ago when her own teachers called her lazy. Avery set the sketchbook down and moved closer, sitting on the cold floor so she was entirely beneath Maddie's eye level, making herself completely non-threatening. "Maddie, look at me," Avery said, waiting patiently until the girl hesitated and peeked through her messy curls. "When you look at a book, what happens to the words? Do they jump? Do the letters switch places, like AB turning into AD?" Maddie's breath hitched. Her red, swollen eyes widened in absolute shock, as if Avery had just spoken a magic spell. "How do you know that?" she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Because they do that to me too," Avery confessed, letting the raw truth anchor her words in a house built entirely on secrets. "I spent my whole childhood thinking I was stupid, thinking my brain was broken. But I was not broken, Maddie, and neither are you. You just see the world differently. You have dyslexia." The silence that followed was so profound it felt heavy, pressing against the steel-reinforced walls. For the first time in 5 long years, the towering walls around Maddie Brennan cracked. The little girl slid off the bed and dropped to her knees beside Avery, her small hands trembling as she grabbed the cheap fabric of the nanny's sleeve. "You really see them jumping too?" Maddie asked, a desperate, agonizing plea for connection. "I do," Avery promised, her own eyes burning with unshed tears. "And I promise you, you're brilliant. Your drawings prove it. We just need to find a new way to learn, a way that makes sense to you." But before Maddie could even form a smile, the heavy, Rhythmic thud of expensive leather shoes echoed from the marble hallway outside. It was Colt. The sound alone was enough to make Maddie freeze instantly, her shoulders snapping back into rigid, terrified attention as the warmth drained from the room. The bedroom door swung open without a single knock. Colton Brennan filled the doorframe, tall, impossibly broad-shouldered, practically radiating a dark, suffocating authority. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that looked like modern armor, his jaw clenched tight, his cold, merciless eyes sweeping the luxurious room in 2 brutal seconds. He did not look at the beautiful sketches scattered on the floor. He did not look at the fresh tear stains gleaming on his daughter's cheeks. He only looked at his heavy gold watch. "The armored car leaves for the academy in exactly 10 minutes, Colt ordered, his voice dangerously quiet, carrying the unmistakable weight of a man who dealt exclusively in life and death. "Do not be late again, Maddie." He did not wait for an answer, nor did he offer a single word of comfort. He turned on his heel and disappeared down the hall, the sharp, heavy clicks of his footsteps fading into the cavernous silence of the mansion. Avery felt an icy chill settle deep into her bones. She understood now exactly what she was dealing with. This was a fortress built on absolute control, ruled by a grieving man who equated vulnerability with fatal weakness. If she was going to save this little girl from drowning in her own supposed failures, she could not ask for permission. She would have to completely break the rules. She would have to lie to the most dangerous man in Chicago. Avery looked back at Maddie, who was already reaching for her heavy skull bag with trembling hands, the spark of hope nearly extinguished. "Our secret," Avery whispered fiercely, holding out her pinky finger. Maddie stared at it for a long, terrifying moment, glancing nervously at the open door where her father had just stood, before wrapping her small, delicate finger tightly around Avery's. "Our secret," the girl whispered back, and in that fragile, desperately needed connection, a quiet rebellion was born. The next 4 weeks became a masterclass in deception, waged entirely in the blind spots of the Brennan fortress. Avery learned the rhythms of the house better than the armed guards who patrolled it. She knew that at 3 in the afternoon, the perimeter security team changed shifts, leaving the back garden unmonitored for exactly 15 minutes. She knew Patrick the butler considered the basement laundry room beneath his dignity, meaning it was the one place free of the glowing red eyes of Colt Brennan's security cameras. It was in that damp, windowless basement, surrounded by the mechanical hum of washing machines and the thick scent of lavender fabric softener, that the real education began. Avery sprayed white clouds of shaving cream onto the glass door of an unused dryer and guided Maddie's small, trembling hand to trace the alphabet. Not with a pencil on terrifying white paper, but through tactile, physical motion. "Feel the curve of the B," Avery whispered, her hands gently covering Maddie's. "Feel how it pushes forward. Now feel the D pulling back." For the first time in her life, the letters did not jump or flip because Maddie was not just seeing them, she was feeling them anchor into reality. When math homework demanded algebra and division, they did not use textbooks. During those stolen 15 minutes in the garden, hidden behind a towering hedge, Avery emptied bags of dried lima beans onto the manicured grass. She showed Maddie how to divide 24 beans into 6 equal piles, turning abstract torture into something the girl could physically hold in her palms. In the kitchen, long after the private chef had gone home, they balanced apples and oranges on an old brass kitchen scale to solve algebraic equations, watching the physical weight tip and balance until Maddie's eyes lit up with the sudden, brilliant flash of comprehension. Every stolen lesson was an immense gamble. Every time they opened a book in the shadows, they were defying the explicit orders of a man who controlled half the criminal underworld. Avery knew that if Colt caught them, the punishment would not be a polite dismissal. In Colt Brennan's world, lying inside his own house was the ultimate betrayal. Yet, the risk faded entirely whenever Avery saw the profound transformation taking root in the little girl. The 0 on the math test became a 65, then a 76. The girl who once cried every morning now walked to the armored Cadillac with her chin raised. One rainy Tuesday afternoon in the laundry room, as Maddie proudly wiped the last soapy equation from the glass, she turned to Avery with a look of intense, quiet curiosity. "Why do you know how to do all this?" Maddie asked, her voice echoing softly against the concrete walls. "You said you do not have a degree yet." Avery paused, the damp rag going still in her hands. The washing machine churned heavily in the background. She looked at Maddie, seeing not a mafia boss's air, but a fragile child desperate for honesty. Avery took a slow, unsteady breath, deciding to offer the deepest, most painful truth she possessed. "I know how to teach this way because I taught myself," Avery said, her voice dropping to a raw whisper. "I studied every book I could find because I used to have a little boy. His name was Lucas." Maddie sat up perfectly straight on the cold concrete floor, her brown eyes wide. "Where is he?" the girl asked gently. Avery swallowed the thick knot of grief that never truly dissolved. "He died when he was 2 years old. He had a brain tumor." Lucas saw the world differently, too. He noticed all the tiny, beautiful things that adults always ignored. "After I lost him, I promised myself that I would never let another child grow up feeling alone or misunderstood." Silence descended on the basement room, heavy and absolute. Maddie did not offer empty apologies or awkward comfort. She understood loss in a way no 12-year-old ever should. Instead, she stood up, walked across the damp floor, and wrapped her small arms tightly around Avery's waist. She buried her face in Avery's sweater, holding on with a fierce, desperate strength. Avery wrapped her arms around the girl, resting her chin on Maddie's messy curls, her own vision blurring with hot tears. It was the first time Maddie Brennan had hugged anyone since the car bomb took her mother 5 years ago. Two broken people, both mourning a catastrophic loss, had found each other in the dark basement of a criminal empire. But secrets, no matter how pure their intentions, could never stay buried forever in the Brennan mansion. The call came at 2 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon, right in the middle of a meeting. Colt was leading with 3 men who did not dare look him in the eye. The private academy's number lit up on the screen. Colt signaled for the room to clear, stepping into the hallway to answer. "Mr. Brennan, this is Catherine Wells, Maddie's math teacher," the voice on the other end stated nervously. Colt demanded she get to the point. Maddie scored an 82 on her most recent test, but the way she solves the equations is highly unusual. She draws balance scales and uses circles to represent unknown variables instead of standard algebraic formulas. "This is not a method taught in any of our approved tutoring programs," the teacher explained. Colt ended the call in absolute silence. He phoned the agency providing Maddie's official private tutor and learned the man had not been to the estate in 5 weeks, each absence explained away by a sudden illness. Colt did not call anyone else because he already knew the answer. That evening, Colt sat waiting at the massive dining table. No phone, no documents, just his 2 hands clasped together and his cold eyes fixed on the empty chair. When Maddie arrived and sat down, one look at her father's face told her everything. "Miss Wells called you," Maddie whispered, trembling. "It was not a question," Colt replied, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Who is teaching you, Maddie?" The little girl bit her lip, her fingers nervously twisting the edge of her expensive napkin. "Promise you will not get mad," she pleaded. "I do not promise anything." "Who is teaching you?" Colt pressed. Maddie closed her eyes and whispered, "Avery." She confessed to learning in the laundry room, the back garden, and the armored car. Every answer was a knife to Colt Brennan's immense pride. It was not the teaching that angered him, but the absolute deception happening right under his nose, exploiting the blind spots of his impenetrable security. In Colt's world, deception from the outside was an insult, but deception from inside his own house was a betrayal that usually ended in blood. "Go to bed," Colt ordered. "Dad, do not fire Avery. She is the only one who helps me," Maddie begged. "Go to bed, Maddie," Colt repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. Once the girl ran upstairs in tears, Colt picked up the internal phone. "Send Avery Sinclair to the 4th floor right now," he commanded the butler. In 20 years of service, the staff had never seen a nanny summoned to the 4th floor. Avery stepped out of the elevator into the room she had been explicitly warned never to enter. It was a cavernous space filled with black leather furniture, an enormous oak desk, and a massive map of Chicago marked with red pushpins. Colt sat behind the desk, completely still, letting Avery stand in front of him just far enough away to feel the crushing weight of his power. "You lied to me," Colt stated coldly. Avery swallowed hard, her heart hammering against her ribs, but she kept her gaze locked on his. "I am sorry I did not tell you, but I do not regret teaching Maddie," she replied. Colt stood up, walking slowly around the oak desk until he was less than a yard away from her. Avery could smell the sharp scent of whiskey and expensive leather, feeling the terrifying, raw danger radiating from the man. "I made myself clear. I forbade it. You did it anyway. Do you know who I am?" he demanded softly. Avery refused to shake. "I know who you are, and you still dared to lie to me in my own house, because your daughter is suffering and no one in this house has seen it," she fired back. She explained the dyslexia, how the letters scrambled and distorted, masking her brilliant intelligence behind the untreated trauma of the car bombing. Colt stared at her for a very long time. He had negotiated with ruthless killers and navigated deadly cartels, but this was the first time anyone had stood in his inner sanctum and looked him straight in the eye without a shred of fear. He walked back to his desk, pulling out a printout of the verified school grades. Math from a 0 to an 82. English from a failing grade to a solid passing score. "What do you want?" Colt asked finally. Avery took a deep breath, knowing one wrong word could make her disappear from Chicago forever. "3 conditions," Avery stated firmly. "First, I need to keep attending my teaching degree classes at night. Second, Maddie must get a full dyslexia evaluation from a specialist. Third, I have full authority to develop the teaching methods that work for her, and no one interferes." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Colt looked at the defiant young woman, and the sharp edge of his fury slowly gave way to a grudging, profound respect. "Starting tomorrow, you are not the nanny anymore. You are Maddie's official tutor. Triple salary. Patrick will arrange a private study for you, and I will call a dyslexia specialist this week," Colt declared. Avery felt her knees go weak with relief. "Thank you," she whispered. "Do not thank me," Colt warned. "Prove I was not wrong to trust you." Avery nodded, turning and walking out of the dangerous room with her head held high. When the heavy door finally clicked shut behind her, she leaned against the cold marble wall of the hallway, closed her eyes, and let her hands shake for the very first time. News spread through the elite circles of Chicago faster than a bullet fired in a dark alleyway. The story of Colton Brennan promoting an uncredentialed nanny to the position of chief tutor for his only daughter became the featured appetizer at every lunch inside the exclusive country clubs along the Gold Coast. Wealthy women in designer suits leaned across linen-covered tables, whispering in hushed, scandalized tones about the 27-year-old girl from the wrong side of the city. They did not mourn for Maddie or care about her newfound academic success. They mourned for the disruption of their strict social order, deeply offended that a girl with a worn backpack and no college degree had somehow bypassed the velvet ropes of their world and secured a triple salary from a Mafia king. The poisonous rumor drifted north across 3 sprawling avenues until it reached a mansion even larger and more opulent than Colt's fortress. Evelyn Brennan sat in her pristine drawing room, holding a cup of Earl Grey tea, wearing a cream tweed suit like an immaculate suit of armor. At 70 years old, Evelyn possessed silver haircut to absolute perfection and blue eyes as unforgiving and cold as a frozen lake in January. Her late husband had built the legitimate real estate foundation of the Brennan Empire decades ago, leaving her 40% of the legal holding corporation that served as a flawless shield for every dollar the family earned from the darkness. Evelyn never stained her own hands with blood, but she knew exactly where the blood came from, and she protected the Brennan name with a weapon sharper than any gun. That weapon was absolute, unyielding control. Setting her antique teacup onto a silver tray, she picked up her phone and dialed her son. There were no pleasantries when Colt answered, no warm greetings between mother and son. "Explain this nanny business to me, Colton," she demanded, her voice chilling the air in the room. Colt's response was flat and guarded as he explained that Avery was getting tangible results and that Maddie had never done this well in school before. "You have handed my granddaughter over to a street girl with no degree, no pedigree, and no standing whatsoever," Evelyn snapped, her perfectly manicured fingers tightening around the heavy receiver. "And you call that a sound decision for the Brennan legacy?" Colt did not flinch on the other end of the line, his tone dropping an octave. "Maddie has never been this happy before, Mother. She is finally learning." Silence stretched over the line for 3 agonizing seconds before Evelyn spoke again, her words slow and dripping with aristocratic venom. "Happiness does not build empires, Colton. Discipline builds empires. Your father understood that perfectly. You used to understand it too, until this girl appeared out of nowhere and blinded you. You know absolutely nothing about her past or her intentions." Colt's voice darkened into the deadly, quiet tone he usually reserved for his most dangerous enemies. "I know enough. I know she does not have a fancy degree, and I know she comes from nothing. But Maddie is my daughter, and I decide who stays in my house." Evelyn let a heavy, oppressive silence speak for her next, offering a silent reminder of the 40% stake she held in the legitimate businesses. If she pulled her capital, the company would be forced to restructure. Restructuring meant massive financial audits, and audits meant federal investigators would start asking the kind of questions the Brennan family could not afford to answer. "Are you threatening me?" Colt asked softly, recognizing the unspoken leverage. "I am protecting the family," Evelyn countered smoothly, her face completely devoid of emotion. "The question is, who are you protecting? The family legacy, or a girl you have known for less than 2 months?" Colt ended the call without another word, severing the connection with a sharp click. Evelyn slowly lowered the phone, her cold eyes fixed on the manicured gardens outside her window. She realized with terrifying clarity that her son had slipped beyond her control, influenced by a completely unsuitable outsider who was softening his ruthless edge. If Colt would not listen to reason, she would have to surgically remove the problem herself, ensuring the street girl was exposed as a fraud before the entire city could laugh at them. Evelyn picked up the phone a second time and dialed Richard Ashford, the headmaster of the elite private academy Maddie attended. It was a school the Brennan family had heavily funded 10 years earlier to build a massive library wing, a fact Evelyn never let anyone forget. "Richard, this is Evelyn Brennan," she began smoothly, projecting the aura of a deeply concerned grandmother. "I am calling about a very serious matter regarding my granddaughter's sudden academic progress. My son has hired someone with absolutely no qualifications to teach her at home. Grades rising that quickly under such dubious circumstances strike me as highly unnatural. Do you not believe someone might be doing her work for her?" The headmaster hesitated, trapped between his academic duty and the massive financial weight of the Brennan name. "I do not want to jump to conclusions, Mrs. Brennan," he stammered, clearly sweating under the pressure of her implication. "I do not want conclusions," Evelyn interrupted coldly, setting the trap with flawless precision. "I want you to verify it. The academic board must require Maddie to take a special assessment in every core subject, completely isolated and under direct faculty supervision. If she truly knows the material, there will be no issue. But if she fails, I expect the academic dishonesty to be exposed immediately, and I expect the tutor to be held entirely responsible for ruining my granddaughter's academic career." That afternoon, Colt received a phone call from the headmaster of the private academy, requesting an immediate meeting regarding a highly serious matter involving Maddie. Colt arrived at the school within the hour, sitting across from Richard Ashford, whose face looked like a man trying desperately to remain neutral between two massive forces he had no desire to offend. Ashford explained the sudden concerns about the unusual improvement in grades, stating that to ensure absolute fairness, the academic board had decided to require Maddie to take a rigorous special assessment in 6 core subjects the following Monday. The exams would be taken in complete isolation, under the direct supervision of the faculty. If the results showed she truly had mastered the material, there would be no issue, but if she failed, she faced immediate suspension for academic dishonesty and probable expulsion. Colt looked at the headmaster with the kind of dark, unblinking stare that in any other room would have made a grown man look away in terror. But this was a school, not his criminal territory, and he knew using brutal force here would only make the situation vastly worse for his daughter. He asked who filed the formal complaint, but when Ashford nervously refused to disclose the source, Colt did not press him because he already knew the answer. When he returned to the bulletproof mansion, Colt summoned Avery to the 4th-floor office for the second time. He delivered the brutal news without softening the blow. The school is testing Maddie on Monday in 6 subjects, and if she fails, she will be expelled, Colt stated, his jaw clenched tight. Avery went incredibly pale, her hands gripping the edge of his massive oak desk, but she kept her voice perfectly steady. She knew instantly who was behind the vicious sabotage. Maddie will pass, Avery promised. Colt asked if she was absolutely sure. I am sure of what I have taught her, Avery replied softly. I am just not sure what that kind of crushing pressure will do to a 12-year-old child when she knows the entire world is waiting for her to fail. That weekend became a grueling, intensely emotional crucible. Avery taught Maddie from early morning until late at night, not by cramming raw knowledge into her brain, because Maddie already possessed the knowledge, but by desperately trying to rebuild the fragile confidence that 12 years of being called stupid had completely shattered. They sat on the floor of the temporary study Patrick had arranged, surrounded by towering piles of books and scattered papers. Maddie, listen to me very carefully, Avery said, holding the little girl by the shoulders. On Monday, you will walk into that cold exam room all alone. There will be no balance scales, no lima beans, no shaving cream on the glass. It will just be you and the test paper. Maddie bit her lip, her green eyes filling with fresh tears. Avery, I am so scared, the girl whispered. You are allowed to be completely terrified, Avery reassured her, brushing a messy brown curl behind Maddie's ear. But you must remember this. No matter what happens in that room, a piece of paper does not define who you are. You have proven to me that you are brilliant every single day for the past 2 months, and one test cannot take that away from you. Maddie looked down at her hands, her voice trembling violently. If I fail, will Dad send you away? Avery wanted to say no, wanted to promise with absolute certainty that they would stay together forever, but she looked into the girl's terrified eyes and knew Maddie was far too old to believe in empty promises. No, I am not going anywhere, Avery lied softly, fighting with everything she had to keep her voice from breaking, because the horrifying truth was that in Colt Brennan's heavily guarded house, no one could guarantee tomorrow. On Sunday night, Colt quietly walked past the temporary study on the 2nd floor. The heavy wooden door was left slightly open. He stopped in the dim hallway and looked inside. Avery was sitting on the carpet beside Maddie, and the two of them were laughing softly over a drawing. Maddie rested her head completely against Avery's shoulder, leaning into her naturally and easily, exactly the way a child leans against her own mother. In that quiet, unguarded moment, Colt Brennan felt an intense emotion he had never prepared himself for. It was jealousy. It was not jealousy in the ordinary sense, but a profound jealousy of Avery because she could do what he, the terrifying man who ruthlessly controlled half of Chicago, could not do. She could make his traumatized daughter trust completely, open up fully, and lean on someone without a single drop of fear. He stood hidden in the shadows for a few more seconds, watching the warmth radiate from the small room, then silently walked away without letting either of them know he had been there. Monday morning arrived with a cold, heavy tension. At 7 o'clock, Maddie stood at the massive front door in her pristine uniform, her heavy school bag slung over her small shoulder, her face pale and drawn tight with nerves, but she was not crying. Avery stood firmly on her right side, one hand resting protectively on Maddie's shoulder, giving it a gentle, reassuring squeeze. Then, Colt stepped up and stood on her left side, his hands in his pockets, his back straight, his face as unreadable as stone. The simple fact that he was standing there in the morning, instead of already being sealed in his armored car on the way to a dark meeting, was something that had never happened before. "You will be okay," Avery told the girl. "You are much stronger than you think," Colt added, his deep voice offering a rare anchor of support. Maddie looked at both of them, drawing a shaky breath before climbing into the back of the waiting vehicle. Vincent shut the heavy door, and before the car pulled away toward the iron gates, Maddie turned to look back through the dark, tinted rear window. She saw Avery and Colt still standing together at the door, side by side, watching her leave. That beautiful image, two adults standing united to send her off to face her greatest fear, was something this cold mansion had not held once since her mother died. Even though her stomach was tied into tight, agonizing knots of terror, Maddie Brennan managed to smile. Maddie sat entirely alone in the sterile examination room, facing a stern proctor and 6 neatly stacked test booklets on the cold desk. The heavy door closed with a final click behind her. There was no Avery, no balance scales, no lima beans, no shaving cream on glass, just the 12-year-old girl, a sharpened pencil, and the terrifying white pages where the words would inevitably start dancing the moment she looked at them. Math came first. Maddie opened the thick booklet and saw 15 complex equations lined up across the paper. The numbers and letters immediately began trembling in the familiar, dizzying way. She closed her eyes tightly, took a deep breath, and did exactly what Avery had taught her. She did not look at the confusing letters, she looked at the profound meaning behind them. Beside each equation, she drew a tiny, precise Fallon scale, turning the unknown variable into an apple on one side and turning the equal sign into the steady point of balance. For geometry, she meticulously redrew the shapes the way she saw them vividly in her head, turning them in 3 dimensions, shading them, and adding brilliant notes with arrows instead of long, confusing sentences. Fractions magically became slices of pizza, the exact kind she and Avery had cut on the granite island in the kitchen. Every single math problem became a small, logical story, and Maddie told each of those stories beautifully on paper. Then came English. The reading comprehension section was still incredibly hard because the black words still shifted and swam, but Maddie used her index finger to follow each line slowly and patiently, tracing the paper the exact way Avery had taught her in the armored car every morning. In grammar, she visualized the woman captain crossing the ocean, seeing nouns as the large, steady islands, verbs as the sturdy boats moving between them, and adjectives as the vibrant colors of the water. Then came the dreaded essay section. The prompt simply said to write about the bravest person you know. Maddie stared at the words, and for the first time all day, she did not need a single special technique or visual trick. She only needed the absolute truth. Her pencil moved quickly across the page. The handwriting still twisted here and there, still turning some letters backward, but the powerful story itself came through clear and true in every single line. "The bravest person I know does not wear a cape," Maddie wrote. "She wears old t-shirts and carries a worn-out backpack. Her name is Avery. She was my nanny, then my teacher, then the person I trust most in the entire world. She taught me that being smart does not mean knowing every answer. It means not giving up when you do not know. She lost her only son, but she did not let the terrible pain turn her into a bitter person. She turned that pain into love for me. Real heroes do not fly. They just do not stop believing in other people." In science, Maddie completely redrew every complex experiment in staggering detail, using arrows and intricate diagrams instead of long paragraphs. In geography, She turned the blank map into a sweeping travel story, making each river a distinct character and each mountain range a monumental challenge. 6 subjects, 8 grueling hours. Maddie finally walked out of the examination room with incredibly tired eyes but a perfectly straight back. Then came 3 agonizing days of waiting. 3 days during which Avery barely slept, lying wide awake in her room on the 2nd floor, staring blindly at the dark ceiling and imagining every worst-case scenario. 3 days during which Colt asked his butler every single morning if the school had called yet, then went his criminal empire with his jaw noticeably tighter than usual. 3 days during which Maddie asked every hour if they had the results, then went back to intensely drawing in her black sketchbook just to keep her small hands busy and stop her anxious mind from spinning out of control. Finally, on Thursday afternoon, Colt's secure phone vibrated. It was Richard Ashford. The headmaster requested that Colt come to the academy immediately and bring Miss Sinclair with him. Colt looked at Avery. Avery looked back. Neither of them said a single word. They simply got into the armored Cadillac. In the headmaster's massive office, the 6 test booklets were laid out neatly across the polished cherrywood desk, all graded, each marked with a handwritten score in the upper right corner. Richard Ashford sat behind the desk, and his face looked absolutely nothing like it had during their last tense meeting. The political caution was completely gone. He looked like a stunned man who had just witnessed something he had never seen in 20 years of educational work. "Mr. Brennan, Miss Sinclair, I will go straight to the results," Ashford said, his voice thick with disbelief. Math 92, English 88, Science 91, Geography 85, History 90, Art 97. Avery immediately lifted a trembling hand to cover her mouth, hot tears running freely down her cheeks before she could even try to stop them. "But the most impressive thing is not the high scores," Ashford continued. He opened Maddie's math exam and pointed in absolute awe to the tiny, brilliant balance scales she had drawn beside the complex equations. She did not just solve them correctly. She presented her reasoning visually with a level of creativity far beyond the 7th grade. Then, the headmaster slowly opened the English essay. He read the final line aloud in the quiet room. "Real heroes do not fly. They just do not stop believing in other people." He set the paper down gently. "In 20 years as headmaster, I have never witnessed a miraculous transformation in a student like this, and I owe Miss Sinclair a profound apology for ever doubting her." He turned fully to Avery. "Miss Sinclair, the teaching method you have developed for Maddie is exactly the kind of thing the school desperately needs. I would like to formally invite you to serve as a teaching methods consultant for the academy to help build a dedicated support program for students with dyslexia." Avery looked at him, tears still falling, her voice trembling violently. "Mr. Ashford, I do not even have a college degree yet." The headmaster shook his head slightly. "You have something a piece of paper cannot teach. You have tangible results." Colt had been completely silent the entire time. He had not said a single word, his jaw tight, his intense eyes fixed straight ahead, but anyone watching closely would have seen that the rims of his eyes were suspiciously red. A kind of raw emotion the Mafia boss never allowed anyone to see and could not stop in this moment even if he tried. On the tense drive home, the two of them sat in absolute silence in the back of the SUV. Finally, Colt spoke, his voice much lower and rougher than usual. "Thank you." It was just 2 simple words, but coming from Colton Brennan, they carried vastly more weight than 1,000 grand speeches. When they finally walked through the heavy front door, Maddie was already waiting in the grand foyer, her face tight with suffocating nerves and both hands clenched into tiny fists. "What happened?" she asked breathlessly. Avery broke into a massive, tearful smile. The moment Maddie saw that glowing expression, she understood everything. The little girl let out a deafening scream of pure joy and threw herself completely into Avery's arms, hugging her with all her might. "I really did it. I really did it," Maddie cried out. "You did brilliantly, all 6 subjects," Avery laughed, burying her face in the girl's messy curls. "And the headmaster asked me to work at the school, Maddie." Behind them, Colt stood quietly leaning against the marble doorframe, his hands casually in his pockets, watching the two of them embrace. He did not step into the warm hug because he did not know how to yet, but he stood there completely captivated. For the first time in 5 brutal years, the cold, dead eyes of a ruthless Mafia boss were looking at something he had fully believed died with his wife. He was looking at hope. The news that the prestigious academy had invited Avery to become an official teaching consultant reached Evelyn Brennan before Colt even had the chance to call his mother himself. A wealthy associate heard it from the wife of a school board member and immediately called Evelyn, her voice carrying that exact mix of feigned outrage and deep delight that came from finally having a scandal big enough to make a Friday afternoon interesting. Evelyn ended the call after 45 seconds without even saying goodbye. She sat completely motionless in her drawing room for 5 minutes, her tea growing cold on the table, her piercing eyes fixed on the window without seeing anything except a massive, unforgiving insult. She had patiently let her son make his own decisions for far too long. She had warned him when he refused to listen. She had orchestrated the grueling school assessment to expose the girl, and that flawless plan had spectacularly failed. Now the uneducated street girl was not only permanently entrenched inside Colt's house, she was on the verge of entering the elite school system as well. It was enough. That very afternoon, Evelyn met Nina Torres at a quiet, incredibly expensive cafe on Michigan Avenue. Nina was 35 years old, her black hair twisted into a neat bun, dressed in a sharp gray blazer. She was a former Chicago police officer turned private investigator because the private sector money was vastly better and her flexible conscience was asked far fewer questions. "I need you to find absolutely everything on a woman named Avery Sinclair," Evelyn instructed, sliding a folder across the table. 27 years old, currently working in my son's house. Nina asked exactly what Evelyn was looking for. "Everything," Evelyn replied coldly. "Everyone has a past, Miss Torres. I need you to dig hers up and bring it to me." It took Nina exactly 3 weeks. She drove down to the poorest neighborhoods of the city, knocked on the peeling door of Avery's old apartment, spoke to gossiping neighbors, found former landlords, and traced obscure hospital records. She found exactly what she was paid to find. The first piece of information was that Avery Sinclair got pregnant at 17. The father of the baby was 42 at the time, the manager of the rundown grocery store where Avery worked after school, and a married man with 2 children. Nina simply wrote in her official report that the subject engaged in an immoral relationship with a married man. She deliberately did not write that Avery was only 17 and the man was 25 years older, meaning under the law it was not a relationship at all, but rather the severe sexual exploitation of a vulnerable minor. The second piece of information was far more devastating. Avery's son, Lucas Sinclair, died at the age of 2 from a malignant brain tumor. Nina found an elderly neighbor who clearly remembered one terrible night when the little boy was violently sick with a high fever, crying all night long, and claimed Avery did not take him to the hospital until the next morning. Nina wrote in her report that multiple sources confirmed the subject delayed taking her child to the emergency room, indicating severe signs of negligence in childcare. She completely omitted the desperate truth that Avery had absolutely no health insurance, no car, and that the agonizing delay meant she had to wait until dawn just to walk 4 miles to the nearest public emergency room because she did not have a single dollar to pay for an ambulance. The third piece of information was that Avery had been abruptly let go from 2 different wealthy families before coming to work for the Brennan estate. Both families curtly refused to provide references. Nina wrote that Avery was dismissed from 2 households for highly improper conduct. She did not write that the first employer had aggressively cornered Avery in the kitchen at midnight, and Avery had slapped him before being fired the next morning to protect his reputation, or that the second employer was irrationally jealous. because her husband had merely praised Avery for taking such excellent care of their children. Evelyn received the thick brown envelope on a Tuesday morning. She sat in her drawing room reading it one page at a time, and each toxic page pleased her vastly more than the one before. That afternoon, she went to Colt's mansion entirely unannounced. Carrying the envelope filled with twisted reports and manipulated statements, she walked straight up to the 4th floor and set it down firmly on Colt's massive oak desk. "Read it," she commanded. Colt opened the file. He looked at the photographs of Avery at 17, pregnant and standing outside a crumbling apartment building. He read the police record of the married man. He read the devastating statement about delaying medical care for a dying toddler. He read the employment history stamped twice in glaring red ink. She got pregnant by a married man at 17, let her child die through sheer negligence, and was fired from 2 homes for depraved behavior, Evelyn stated, her voice echoing in the cavernous room. "And you have blindly entrusted my granddaughter to this person, Colton." Colt finished reading the final page and slowly set the file down on the desk. He did not lash out at his mother in blind rage. He did not immediately defend Avery. He just sat there in absolute, terrifying silence. And that silence was the most frightening thing of all, because Colt Brennan was not shaken by whether he actually believed his mother or not. He was violently shaken because the deep, ingrained Mafia instinct inside him hated one thing above all other things in the world: withheld information. Avery had never told him about the older married man, had never told him about being fired in disgrace, and had never fully told him the agonizing details about Lucas dying. In Colt's violent world, hidden information was incredibly dangerous information. "What do you want?" Colt finally asked, his voice dead and hollow. "I want you to open your eyes," Evelyn said, smoothing the front of her Chanel jacket before leaving the room with the supreme confidence of a woman who knew she had just driven the knife exactly where it needed to go. And while Colt sat completely alone staring at the poisonous file on his desk, Evelyn had already moved to the next phase of her ruthless plan, picking up her phone to ensure the twisted story of the Brennan nanny spread across the entire city by morning. The call came on Wednesday morning, and Richard Ashford's voice carried absolutely none of the profound warmth from their miraculous meeting just a week before. It was tight, incredibly strained, and strictly professional as he demanded Miss Sinclair come to his office today, as soon as possible, and completely alone. Avery arrived at the prestigious academy at 10 o'clock sharp. Ashford sat rigidly behind his massive cherrywood desk. He did not offer her coffee, he did not shake her trembling hand, and he absolutely did not smile. Resting ominously in the very center of his desk lay a thick brown envelope. Avery recognized it instantly, not because she had seen that specific one, but because she recognized the devastating weight of a wealthy person's weapon. "Miss Sinclair, I have received some deeply disturbing information regarding your past," Ashford began, his voice devoid of any empathy. "I have an obligation to the board and to our students to ask you directly. Your son, Lucas Sinclair, died when he was 2 years old. Is that correct?" Avery felt as if someone had just punched her square in the chest. "Yes," she whispered. Ashford did not look away. "Is it true that you deliberately delayed taking him to the emergency room when he became seriously ill, and that this negligence contributed to his death?" Avery trembled. Her entire body shook uncontrollably from her cold fingertips all the way up to her tense shoulders, a violent, agonizing trembling that she simply could not suppress. But she absolutely did not lower her head in shame. She looked straight into Richard Ashford's eyes and spoke in a low, perfectly measured voice, drawing each heavy word from the deepest, most shattered part of her soul, a place she had kept locked tightly shut for 8 long years. "Lucas had stage 4 brain cancer," Avery stated clearly. "He was diagnosed when he was only 14 months old. The wealthy doctors at the prestigious hospitals said his chance of survival was under 10%. I was 20 years old, unmarried with no family, no health insurance, and I was working 2 grueling shifts a day, spending my mornings cleaning cheap hotel rooms and my nights scrubbing dishes in a diner just to survive. When I got that devastating diagnosis, I sold absolutely everything I owned. I sold my bed, my dresser, my small dining table, the chairs, and even the only fan in my suffocating apartment. I slept on the hard, freezing floor at the county hospital for 8 brutal months of chemotherapy right beside my baby's bed, using a thin blanket a kind nurse lent me because I did not even have one of my own. I stopped eating dinner for 6 months just so I could save enough spare change to buy his anti-nausea medicine, because state aid did not cover that specific prescription. I weighed 95 pounds when my little boy died. Ashford sat completely motionless, the color draining rapidly from his face. Avery swallowed the thick, painful knot in her throat and continued, her voice rising with an unstoppable, righteous fury. On the very last night, Lucas ran a terrifyingly high fever. I called emergency services, but they told me the ambulance would take 45 minutes to arrive. 45 minutes, Mr. Ashford, because the South Side slums are not the Gold Coast. I could not wait. I picked up my burning, dying son, wrapped him in my only coat, and I walked 4 miles through the pitch-black night at 2 in the morning, in the middle of freezing January, to reach the emergency room. My hands were completely numb from the freezing cold because I did not own winter gloves. When I finally got there, the doctors told me I had come too late. Avery's voice cracked violently on the last 2 words, but she caught herself fiercely, fighting back the burning tears, and went on. They call that a delay. The wealthy people who handed you that envelope call that negligence. I call that crushing, inescapable poverty. I call that being a 20-year-old mother doing absolutely everything she possibly could to save her child, and it still not being enough. But it was never because I did not try. She leaned forward, placing both of her trembling hands firmly on the edge of his expensive desk. And since we are discussing that file, let me correct the rest of the malicious lies. I did not have a scandalous affair with a married man. I was a 17-year-old high school student and a 42-year-old predator who managed the grocery store where I worked exploited me. Under the law, that is not a relationship, that is severe abuse. As for the 2 wealthy families who fired me, the first employer cornered me in his kitchen at midnight and tried to assault me. I slapped his face, and his wife fired me the next morning to protect his pristine reputation. The second employer fired me simply because her husband praised my ability to handle their children, and she became dangerously jealous. That is my true past, Mr. Ashford. A suffocating silence stretched through the grand, expensive office. Ashford stared at Avery, and he saw something that no private investigator's manipulated file could ever possibly capture. He saw the haunting eyes of a mother who had walked barefoot through absolute hell and carried nothing out of the flames except the raw, undeniable truth. Miss Sinclair, Ashford whispered, his voice cracking with genuine shame. Who sent this file to you? Avery demanded, standing up incredibly straight. I cannot disclose my source, Ashford replied weakly. You do not need to disclose it because I already know, Avery said, her voice ringing with finality. Mr. Ashford, if you do not trust me anymore, I will walk out that door right now. I do not stay anywhere that requires me to defend the tragic death of my little boy to people who have never known what it means to truly suffer. Ashford immediately lifted a desperate hand, motioning frantically for her to sit back down. You do not need to defend yourself ever again, Miss Sinclair, and you absolutely do not need to leave, he pleaded softly. I am incredibly sorry I ever asked you those questions. At that exact same moment on the other side of the city, Colt sat in the heavy shadows of the back seat of his armored Escalade, completely ignoring the blurred city lights sliding past the tinted windows. He was aggressively rereading the thick brown file his mother had left on his desk. He was not reading it with the conflicted, painful eyes of a disappointed son. He was reading it with the cold, calculating eyes of a ruthless Mafia boss who had survived for 2 decades by trusting his terrifying instincts. A Mafia boss did not believe in forced emotion. He believed in raw data, and the data in that expensive file smelled incredibly wrong. It was simply too perfect, too neatly packaged to destroy a specific target. Colt picked up his secure phone and dialed his head of security. "Vincent," Colt commanded, his voice as sharp as broken glass. "Reinvestigate absolutely everything in the Sinclair file. Do not use a single one of my mother's contacts. Use our own men from the ground up. I want the absolute truth, not somebody's incredibly expensive version of it." It took Vincent exactly 4 days to tear the fabricated story completely apart. He drove down to the poorest neighborhoods of the South Side, knocked on the exact same peeling doors the private investigator had knocked on, but Vincent asked entirely different questions. He found the elderly neighbor, Doris Flynn, and instead of asking if Avery had delayed, he asked why Avery had waited until dawn. The elderly woman gave an entirely different, heartbreaking answer. Because the poor girl did not have a single dollar for an ambulance, she did not own a car, and she did not have anyone in the world to help her, Doris explained tearfully. She carried that little boy all the way to the hospital through the freezing winter night. I felt awful, but I could not do a thing to stop her. Vincent then tracked down the wealthy Morrison family in Lincoln Park. The husband flatly refused to answer the door, but his wife eventually answered the phone. When Vincent coldly informed her that he legally represented Colton Brennan and required the absolute truth about her former nanny, the woman went completely quiet for a long, terrified moment before breaking down. "My husband groped her in the kitchen," she confessed, her voice shaking with shame. She fought back fiercely. "We fired her to keep it completely quiet, and I am not proud of it." The second wealthy family told a devastatingly similar story of irrational, bitter jealousy because a husband had complimented Avery's childcare skills. Vincent called Colt at 9 o'clock that Thursday night. "Boss, the investigator's file was systematically and maliciously distorted," Vincent reported without hesitation. Every single fact was deliberately turned 180 degrees to frame her. "The girl is not at fault in any of it." Colt ended the call and sat in absolute silence in his dark office for 30 seconds. He did not yell. He did not throw a glass against the wall. He simply stood up, walked out to his waiting car, and drove directly to his mother's palatial estate. He did not call ahead to announce his arrival. He did not bother to knock on the massive front doors. Colt bypassed the armed guards and walked straight through the immaculate drawing room where Evelyn was sitting calmly with a hardcover book. Without saying a word, Colt violently threw the investigator's file onto the glass coffee table, the manipulated pages scattering everywhere like dead leaves. "You hired someone to completely fabricate dirt and maliciously ruin an innocent girl," Colt stated, his voice dangerously low. Evelyn carefully set her book down, remaining as composed and cold as ever. "I protected the legacy of this family," she replied smoothly. Colt stepped forward, leaning his massive frame over the table so his face was less than a foot from his mother's pristine features. "You twisted the truth to destroy a girl who was brutally exploited at 17 by a 42-year-old predator," Colt snarled, stripping away her aristocratic lies. "She lost her only son because of crippling poverty, not negligence. She was fired because her wealthy employer sexually assaulted her, not because she was immoral. And you knew every single piece of that because your investigator dug deep enough to find the real truth before choosing to twist it into a weapon for you." Evelyn did not even blink. "Whatever the unfortunate truth is, she still does not belong anywhere near this family," she insisted stubbornly. Colt planted both hands firmly on the table and spoke in a terrifying, guttural voice that Evelyn Brennan had never heard him use with her before, a voice he strictly reserved for the men he was about to put into the ground. "Listen to me very carefully, Mother. If you touch Avery Sinclair one more time in any way, directly or through someone else, I will permanently cut you off from absolutely everything. I will strip your money, your power, and your name. You will not be a Brennan anymore. You will be a complete nobody." Evelyn finally went incredibly pale. It was not just the brutal threat that terrified her, because she had heard vicious threats her entire life. It was because for the very first time, when she looked deep into her son's cold, dead eyes, she did not see her son anymore. She saw her late husband, Seamus Brennan, the ruthless founder of the Empire, the man who, once he made up his mind, could not be moved by heaven or earth. Colt straightened his suit jacket, turned on his heel, and walked out of the massive house without ever looking back. Evelyn remained completely alone in her silent drawing room, staring at the scattered files on the glass table, her manicured hand clenched tightly around the armrest, realizing with crushing certainty that she had finally lost control. While Colt was viciously tearing apart the manipulated files in Evelyn's immaculate drawing room, and the entire Brennan family hierarchy was silently sinking into a dangerous chaos, Bennett Cross sat in the dimly lit back room of a heavily guarded Italian restaurant on Halsted Street. He was 38 years old, the ruthless Mafia boss who controlled the violent southern districts of the city. He was the very man Colt Brennan had violently pushed out of 3 massive, incredibly lucrative territories over the past 2 years, costing Bennett tens of millions of dollars and an unforgivable amount of pride. Bennett sat at a massive wooden table, slowly turning over the latest surveillance photographs his specialized men had just delivered. The glossy pictures showed Avery Sinclair leaving the Brennan mansion at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday evening. There were photos of her picking Maddie up at the heavily guarded school gates, and photos of Avery sitting in the manicured back garden with the girl, the two of them laughing brightly with their heads bent over an open textbook. Bennett looked at the candid photographs and smiled. It was a slow, incredibly satisfied smile, the exact kind worn by a dangerous man who had just found a massive, crumbling crack in an impenetrable wall he had been desperately trying to break for 5 long years. "Find out absolutely everything there is to know about this girl," Bennett ordered his lieutenant, his voice rough with anticipation. "I want her name, her exact age, her tragic past, her deepest weakness, everything." He set down a close-up photograph of Avery smiling warmly at Maddie, then took a slow sip of dark red wine. "Colton Brennan finally has a weakness." Outside the restaurant, a nondescript black sedan sat parked exactly 3 blocks from the Brennan mansion, engine completely off, headlights completely dark, with 2 heavily armed men inside patiently and meticulously recording every single movement around the massive iron gates. They watched the shift changes of the armed guards, they memorized the exact routes of the armored vehicles, and they tracked exactly when the staff came and went. And while Colt was furiously dismantling his mother's lies, and while Avery and Maddie were happily studying in the safety of the 2nd floor, they had absolutely no idea they were being watched with such predatory intent. The surveillance team quickly noticed a highly predictable, incredibly dangerous pattern. Avery Sinclair left the bulletproof mansion at exactly 7 o'clock on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday evenings. She walked the exact same route down the exact same dimly lit street, completely alone, walking directly to the subway station because she was dedicatedly attending night classes at the community college for her teaching degree. And clearly, because he was entirely focused on protecting his daughter inside the fortress, Colt Brennan had not yet considered that the unassuming tutor might desperately need armed protection beyond the massive stone walls of his heavily fortified estate. Bennett Cross folded the surveillance photographs neatly, tucking them into his jacket pocket. He looked at the lieutenant standing nervously beside the wooden table. Next Tuesday, Bennett instructed coldly, "Grab her on her walk to the subway station. Keep it completely clean, keep it incredibly fast, and leave absolutely no trace." The plan was set into violent motion, a silent, deadly trap waiting to spring in the dark alleys of Chicago, targeting the one person who had finally brought light back into the Brennan Empire, turning her very dedication to her future into the weapon that would be used to destroy her. Tuesday evening at exactly 20 minutes past 9, Avery stepped out of the heavy glass doors of the downtown community college, her worn backpack slung over one shoulder. Her mind was still half caught in the intense lecture on special education methods she had just attended, mentally reviewing new ways to help Maddie understand complex geography. The Chicago street was incredibly quiet. The old streetlights flickered with a dim yellow glow, casting long, stretching shadows across the damp pavement. She turned into the narrow, familiar shortcut alley she had safely taken dozens of times before to reach the subway station. Before she had even taken 10 complete steps into the darkness, a heavy white van without license plates braked violently beside her. The side door slid open with a sharp, metallic screech. Two large men dressed entirely in black, their faces completely covered by dark masks, moved infinitely faster than she could even attempt to scream. One man clamped a thick, damp cloth heavily laced with a sweet, sickening chemical over her mouth and nose. The other man grabbed her waist and dragged her brutally into the dark cavern of the van. The heavy doors slammed shut. The vehicle sped away into the night. The entire violent abduction took exactly 11 seconds, and the narrow street fell completely silent once again, as if absolutely nothing had happened at all. Inside the speeding van, they immediately blindfolded her, bound her wrists tightly behind her back with thick plastic zip ties, and did not speak a single word. The van drove erratically for approximately 20 minutes, taking countless sharp turns before finally grinding to a halt. Avery heard the heavy scrape of a massive rolling metal door, smelling the distinct, suffocating scent of old machine oil, damp concrete, and the steady drip of dirty water somewhere nearby. It was an abandoned warehouse. Rough hands dragged her out of the vehicle and forced her down onto a freezing metal chair, the biting cold cutting right through the fabric of her pants, and then they completely walked away. Absolute silence fell over the massive room. Avery sat completely alone in the terrifying darkness behind the blindfold, her hands tied tightly behind her back, her heart beating so incredibly hard she could hear it echoing in her own ears. But in that moment of absolute terror, she did not think of herself, and she did not think of dying. She thought only of Maddie. She thought about the fact that if she did not make it back to the bulletproof mansion tonight, there would be absolutely no one left to tell that fragile 12-year-old girl tomorrow morning that she was not stupid. Back at the Gold Coast Fortress, at exactly 15 minutes past 10, Colt's secure phone vibrated loudly on his massive oak desk. It was an unknown number. Colt answered with his last name, his voice steady and cold. "It has been a long time, Colton." Bennett Cross's voice slithered through the speaker, slow and deeply satisfied, the voice of a dangerous man who knew he was holding the winning card. Colt sat up perfectly straight in his fourth-floor office. Vincent stood silently beside the door and immediately noticed the terrifying shift in his boss's rigid posture. "What do you want, Cross?" Colt demanded, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "I have the one thing you currently care about most," Bennett laughed darkly. "The girl, Avery Sinclair. Pretty, I have to admit. I can certainly see why you keep her locked up in your house." A suffocating silence filled the fourth-floor office. Colt did not breathe. Or maybe he did without even knowing it, because absolutely everything inside his chest had just violently stopped. "If you want her back in one piece, come to the old warehouse at 47th and Ashland," Bennett ordered. "Come completely alone in exactly 1 hour." Bennett hung up the phone. Colt set the receiver down on the desk with a terrifying slowness. In that horrifying moment, the untouchable Mafia boss realized two devastating things at once. First, Bennett Cross knew that Avery Sinclair mattered to him, which meant Avery had been aggressively watched for weeks right under his own nose, and his $1 million security team had not known a thing. Second, and this struck him even harder than Bennett's violent threat, he realized that he had completely fallen in love with Avery Sinclair without even realizing it. He knew it with absolute certainty because when he heard Bennett say her name, what violently surged up in his chest was not the righteous anger of a Mafia boss whose pride had been deeply insulted. It was pure, raw, and absolute fear. The exact kind of blinding fear he had felt only once before in his entire life on the horrifying night he watched his wife's car explode into flames. "Vincent," Colt said, his voice completely devoid of any human emotion. "Call the strike team. I want 10 heavily armed men surrounding the warehouse at 47th and Ashland in complete silence." Vincent hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Boss," he explicitly said alone, the loyal bodyguard cautioned. Colt stood up, his towering frame radiating pure, unfiltered violence. "I do not take orders from dead men." At exactly 53 minutes past 10, 3 armored black sport utility vehicles rolled to a silent halt 2 blocks away from the abandoned warehouse on 47th and Ashland. Vincent and a heavily armed team of 10 elite men moved seamlessly through the pitch-black night like lethal shadows, completely surrounding all 4 sides of the massive, decaying brick structure. Colt entered straight through the rusted front door entirely alone, stepping into the cavernous space exactly as Bennett Cross had arrogantly demanded. But Colt knew with absolute certainty that right behind him, 10 high-caliber weapons were perfectly trained on every single cracked window and every rusted exit in the entire building. Bennett stood confidently in the very middle of the freezing space under the sickly, dirty yellow glow of a single hanging bulb. His hands were casually clasped behind his back, flanked by 2 massive bodyguards. Just a few feet behind Bennett, Avery sat rigid on the freezing metal chair, completely blindfolded, her hands tightly tied, her small shoulders trembling violently in the damp air. Right on time, Bennett laughed, his voice echoing loudly against the concrete walls. "I have always deeply respected that about you, Colton." Colt did not even look at the rival boss. His cold, deadly eyes were locked entirely on Avery. "Let her go first," Colt demanded, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that carried across the empty warehouse. "Then we can talk about the 3 lucrative districts you forcefully took from me, and about the $20 million you owe me, and about the new rules of this city," Bennett bargained, the confident smile never leaving his face. "There are absolutely no new rules," Colt replied without a single fraction of hesitation. "Let her go right now." Bennett laughed again, the deeply satisfied laugh of a foolish man who mistakenly thought he held the ultimate advantage over a king. To prove his newfound power, Bennett deliberately stepped closer to the metal chair and laid a heavy, aggressive hand squarely on Avery's trembling shoulder. Avery violently flinched, pulling away from his touch in pure terror. Colt saw that. He saw Bennett's filthy hand on Avery's shoulder. He saw the woman he loved recoil in absolute fear, and in that exact terrifying fraction of a second, something deep inside the untouchable Mafia boss completely broke. It was not the kind of break that collapses a man in grief, but the kind of catastrophic break that snaps a heavy steel chain and finally sets a starving beast totally loose. Colt's deadly signal was absolutely nothing more than the slightest, almost imperceptible nod of his head. Everything erupted in under 15 terrifying seconds. The heavy metal back doors violently burst open with a deafening crash. Vincent and the elite strike team stormed into the room with brutal precision. Bennett's 2 massive bodyguards were violently taken down to the concrete floor before they could even attempt to draw their weapons from their holsters. Bennett spun around, his arrogant face twisting into absolute shock, but before he could even form a single word, Colt was already standing directly in front of him. The first brutal punch shattered Bennett's jaw with a sickening crack. Bennett instantly went down to his knees, completely stunned. The second devastating punch cracked his ribs, forcing him to double over in agonizing pain. Colt ruthlessly grabbed the rival boss by the expensive collar of his jacket, hauled his bleeding face upward, and whispered in a deadly voice that only the 2 of them could hear over the chaos. "You touched what is absolutely mine. That was your very last mistake." Colt dropped Bennett onto the filthy concrete floor like a worthless sack of garbage, not even bothering to look at him again, and immediately turned and rushed to Avery. He dropped to his knees on the cold floor and removed her blindfold with incredibly gentle hands, vastly more gentle than he had ever done anything in his entire violent life. Then he pulled a folding knife from his pocket and carefully sliced through the thick plastic zip ties binding her bruised wrists. Avery blinked rapidly in the harsh yellow light and saw Colt crouched directly in front of her. Looking into his face, she saw something she had never once seen on him before. It was fear. It was absolutely not a fear of Bennett Cross or the brutal violence surrounding them. It was the raw, paralyzing fear of losing her. "Let us go home," Colt whispered softly. He gently helped her to her feet, and when her traumatized legs instantly gave out beneath her, he effortlessly lifted her into his strong arms. Avery leaned her exhausted head against his broad chest, burying her face against his dark shoulder, and as he carried her out of that nightmare, she felt his massive hands physically shaking. Colton Brennan, the undisputed king of the Chicago underworld, the terrifying man all of the city feared, was shaking simply because he was holding her. On the long, tense drive back to the Gold Coast, Vincent drove the armored sport utility vehicle in absolute silence, while Colt sat tightly beside Avery in the dark back seat. The heavy silence stretched for a very long time. Avery was still trembling uncontrollably, wrapped securely in a thick wool blanket Vincent had handed her, staring blankly straight ahead at the passing city lights. Finally, she found her voice. "Why did you come for me?" she whispered, her voice incredibly fragile. Colt did not answer immediately. He looked out the dark window at the blurred streaks of light, and it took so agonizingly long that Avery thought he simply would not answer her at all. Then he spoke, his voice so low and incredibly rough it was almost no more than a ragged breath. "Because if I lose you, I lose absolutely everything. You, Avery. Not the tutor, not the nanny. You." For the very first time that night, Avery turned her head to look directly at him. He did not look back at her. He kept staring rigidly out the window, his jaw clenched tight, his eyes suspiciously red, but his large hand rested quietly on the leather seat directly between them, his palm turned upward like a desperate, silent invitation he simply did not know how to say aloud. Avery slowly slid her trembling hand into his. Colt immediately closed his strong fingers tightly around hers, holding on as if she were the only anchor keeping him alive, and neither of them said another single word for the entire rest of the drive back to the fortress. 3 days after the violent kidnapping, Avery still had not left her quiet room on the second floor. The dark purple bruises on her wrists from the thick plastic zip ties had slowly faded into a sickly yellow-green, but the terrifying wound deep inside her chest had not healed at all. She slept in broken, agonizing fragments, waking up covered in cold sweat at 2 in the morning from haunting dreams of the white van, the suffocating smell of the chemical cloth, and the pitch-black darkness behind the tight blindfold. Maddie came to her room every single morning carrying a heavy wooden breakfast tray she had made all by herself in the massive kitchen. The scrambled eggs were always slightly burned, the toast was unevenly browned, and the orange juice was poured so incredibly full it nearly spilled over the crystal rim. But every single tray came with a small, beautiful drawing carefully tucked beside the ceramic plate. There were drawings of Avery and Maddie sitting together in the sunlit garden, drawings of the 3 of them standing proudly in the grand doorway, and drawings of a warm house with thick smoke rising from the brick chimney. They were beautiful family drawings, the exact kind Maddie had never once made before Avery arrived. On Wednesday night, Colt knocked softly on Avery's bedroom door. He brought a steaming cup of hot tea, set it gently on the wooden bedside table, and then sat down heavily in the reading chair by the tall window. The pale street light slipped quietly through the heavy curtains, illuminating exactly one half of his rugged face while the other half stayed completely hidden in dark shadow. Avery thought that was the most accurate, heartbreaking image of Colton Brennan she had ever seen, half light and half dark, always standing dangerously on the sharp border between the two. "There is something I have not told you," Colt said, his deep voice breaking the heavy silence. "What is it?" Avery asked, sitting up straighter in the massive bed and pulling the thick blanket defensively to her chest. "It is about Bennett Cross," Colt replied, looking out the dark window with a tightly clenched jaw. "Bennett did not kidnap you just to bargain for lucrative territory with me. He took you because he wanted pure, devastating revenge." Avery's breath caught in her throat. "Revenge for what?" she whispered. A suffocating silence filled the room before Colt spoke in the lowest, most shattered voice Avery had ever heard from him. 5 years ago, Francesca's car violently exploded while she was taking Maddie to school. A massive bomb was planted directly under the steel chassis. Francesca died instantly. Maddie was strapped in the back seat. She survived only because the brutal blast was concentrated in the front, but the incredible force threw her hard enough to leave her with a severe head injury. She was completely unconscious for 3 agonizing days in the intensive care unit. Avery gasped, immediately covering her mouth with her trembling hand. "I did not know who planted the bomb," Colt continued, his voice cracking on the agonizing words. "For 5 years, I searched ruthlessly and found absolutely nothing until that terrible night in the warehouse when Bennett arrogantly said to me that I owed him $20 million and a wife. Bennett Cross killed Francesca, and my little girl was in that car." Avery felt hot tears instantly fill her eyes. "My God, Maddie," she whispered. "She does not remember the actual explosion," Colt explained, leaning forward and resting his head in his hands. "But her small body absolutely remembers. The post-traumatic stress disorder, the violent nightmares, the trouble focusing, the blinding fear of loud noises, the total inability to trust anyone. For 5 long years, I mistakenly thought she was only deeply grieving her mother. I did not know the terrible trauma ran that deep. Maddie does not just have congenital dyslexia, Avery. She carries severe, untreated psychological trauma. And you, in just 2 short months, without knowing absolutely anything about her past, still did exactly what an entire expensive team of doctors and the best tutors in Chicago completely failed to do. You made my daughter trust again." A heavy, emotional silence settled over the room. Avery looked down at her shaking hands, tracing the fading bruises on her wrists, and then she looked back up at Colt. "Colt, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice tight with unshed tears. "I have to leave." Colt did not react right away. He sat completely motionless, but Avery clearly saw his large fingers curl into a tight, white-knuckled fist against his knee. "I bring terrible danger to Maddie," Avery explained, her voice trembling but resolute. "Then it took me because I matter to you, and that means any ruthless enemy of yours will inevitably come for me just to get to you. I am the fatal weakness. Colt and Maddie absolutely cannot survive another catastrophic loss." Colt stood up abruptly, crossed the dimly lit room, and for the very first time, he sat down directly beside her on the edge of the mattress, close enough for Avery to feel the immense, comforting warmth coming off his large body. "You are not a weakness," Colt stated fiercely. "You know I am right," Avery cried, a single tear slipping down her pale cheek. "You are not a weakness," Colt repeated, his voice dropping to a desperate, raw whisper. "You are the only actual strength I have left." Colt reached out and gently cupped her face in his large, calloused hands. "Listen to me, Avery. For 5 years, I have lived like a walking corpse. I ran the massive empire. I made millions of dollars. I brutally destroyed enemies, but I died the exact same night Francesca died. I came home every single evening, and this giant house was nothing but a cold tomb. Then you came." He looked deep into her eyes, and Avery saw something she had never seen before. It was total nakedness, no defense, no absolute control, no terrifying mask of a mafia boss. "I love you, Avery," Colt confessed, his voice thick with raw emotion. "I love how incredibly intelligent you are. I love how deeply brave you are. I love the beautiful way you love my daughter like she is your own child. I love the way you look at me without a single drop of fear because this whole world is terrified of me and you're not. And you do not know how precious that is." Avery closed her eyes as tears slipped down her face. "Colt, people will say I climbed up from the laundry room. They will completely ruin us." Colt's expression hardened into pure, protective steel. "Anyone who ever says that will answer directly to me," he promised quietly. "But your world is too dangerous," Avery pleaded. "I do not belong in it." Colt gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "You belong exactly where you are loved, and that is right here." Avery opened her mouth to argue more, but the soft sound of small, hesitant footsteps in the hallway made both of them turn. The heavy wooden door cracked open. Maddie stood there in her pajamas, her brown curls tangled, her green eyes red and wet, clearly having heard enough of the conversation. "Avery, are you really leaving?" Maddie asked, her voice shaking violently. "Maddie, I heard everything," the little girl cried, stepping bravely into the dim room. "You said you are a weakness. You said you have to go. But you are the only mother I have. My real mom is dead. Grandma never hugs me. Dad loves me, but he does not know how to say it. You are the only person who hugs me. The only person who tells me I am actually smart. The only person who sat on the cold laundry room floor and taught me how to write letters. Please do not leave me." Maddie ran across the carpet and wrapped her small arms desperately around Avery's waist, burying her face against Avery's stomach, crying so incredibly hard that absolutely no sound came out. Avery held her tightly back, hot tears falling freely into the little girl's hair. She looked up at Colt, who was now standing beside the bed, his jaw incredibly tight, his eyes shining with unshed tears, both hands clenched at his sides, as if he were trying to hold himself back. Then he finally stepped forward. He placed one strong hand on Maddie's shaking back, and he wrapped his other massive arm completely around Avery's shoulder. For the first time in 5 brutal years, Colton Brennan held both of them at exactly the same time. He did not say anything. He just held them tightly against his chest. The 3 of them stood there in the second-floor bedroom in the middle of the dark night inside the bulletproof mansion of a ruthless Mafia boss. And the moment was so incredibly fragile and so remarkably beautiful that none of them dared breathe too hard for fear of completely breaking it. "I am staying," Avery finally whispered through a thick, tearful throat. "But we have to be incredibly strong." Colt kissed the top of her head, pulling his family closer into the absolute safety of his arms. "A Brennan is always strong," Colt vowed softly. "And now you're a Brennan too." 6 months later, Avery Sinclair stood proudly on the brightly lit stage of the Chicago Community College auditorium, wearing a flowing black graduation gown and a square cap slightly crooked on her head. She tightly held the bachelor's degree in education that had taken her 10 incredibly hard years of life to finally reach. Down in the very front row, Colton Brennan sat wearing a flawless black 3-piece suit, his incredibly broad back perfectly straight, his handsome face unreadable to the general public as always. But the moment Avery's name was proudly called over the loudspeakers and she stepped forward to receive her hard-earned diploma, the untouchable Mafia boss actually smiled and applauded loudly. Next to Colt, Maddie immediately jumped to her feet, clapping her hands high above her head and happily shouting Avery's name across the packed auditorium without caring for a single second who might be looking. The brave 12-year-old girl who just 6 months earlier had cried every single morning from the absolute terror of going to school now stood there with her messy brown curls tied back neatly, her bright green eyes sparkling, smiling so widely that the entire row turned to look at her in awe. Exactly 2 weeks later, Maddie herself was the one standing nervously on a massive wooden stage. It was the Ashford Academy year-end ceremony, held in a grand hall decorated with expensive blue and white silk banners, with 400 wealthy parents and students seated quietly below. Richard Ashford stepped up to the microphone, adjusted his tie, and proudly announced that the prestigious award for the most improved student of the entire year went to Madeline Brennan. Thunderous applause broke out across the room. Maddie walked slowly to the podium, the folded paper in her hands trembling slightly under the bright spotlights. But when she looked down at the front row and saw Avery nod encouragingly, she took a deep breath and began to speak. Last year, I was the worst student at this entire school, Maddie said, her voice echoing clearly. I had all failing grades. People thought I was incredibly lazy. My teachers thought I simply was not trying. I honestly thought I was stupid too. The massive hall went completely silent. But I am not stupid, Maddie continued, her voice growing stronger. I have dyslexia. When I look at books, the letters do not stay still. They violently twist, they jump around, and they switch places. Throughout my entire childhood, nobody ever knew. Not because nobody looked at me, but because nobody bothered to look the right way. Then someone came into my life. She did not have expensive degrees, she was not rich, and she did not come from the kind of place people here think actually matters. But she was the very first person who truly saw me. She taught me that I am not broken, I am just different, and being different is not wrong. Maddie paused, looking directly down at Avery, whose face was already covered in tears. If you know someone who thinks they are stupid, who wants to give up, tell them what Avery Sinclair told me. You are not done. You just have not found the way you learn best yet. Sometimes all a child really needs is one person who believes they matter. Thank you. The applause that burst through the grand hall was deafening. Avery cried openly, not even trying to wipe the hot tears away. Colt sat proudly beside her, his massive arm resting gently along the back of Avery's chair, and he looked at his beautiful daughter on that stage with a brilliant light in his eyes that he had truly thought had gone out forever 5 years earlier. The specialized education program Avery aggressively built at Ashford Academy began officially operating in the fall semester. 32 struggling students were screened and found to have different learning styles, and 11 of them were properly diagnosed with dyslexia for the very first time. Avery passionately trained wealthy teachers in multisensory methods, using the exact same brilliant strategies she had once used to teach Maddie. On the cold concrete floor of the basement laundry room. Meanwhile, Colt Brennan was still the terrifying Colt Brennan. He still ruthlessly ran half of the Chicago underworld from his heavily fortified fourth-floor office, and the criminal empire still operated with cold, precise efficiency. But every single evening at exactly 7 o'clock, he came home. He sat at the massive dining table and happily listened to Maddie talk endlessly about her newest beautiful drawing and her high test scores. He watched Avery sitting directly across from him, smiling warmly at the little girl, and sometimes her beautiful eyes met his across the polished wood, and neither of them needed to say a single word. Even Evelyn Brennan came to dinner on the first Sunday of each month, sitting across from Avery without hostility. Finally putting on her expensive reading glasses to carefully study Maddie's artwork and proudly declaring that the girl drew far better than her late grandfather ever did. One quiet evening, after Maddie had gone to sleep, Avery walked through the grand living room and stopped. There, hanging proudly on the wall above the marble fireplace, a place that had once stood completely empty and heartbreakingly bare, was a beautifully framed picture. Maddie had drawn 3 happy people holding hands. Beneath the colorful drawing, in the slightly uneven but absolutely unmistakable handwriting of a brilliant child with dyslexia, were the powerful words stating that family is not blood, family is who stays when everything else falls apart. Avery gently touched the edge of the wooden frame, looking around the bulletproof Mafia mansion that had finally, miraculously become a warm and loving home. Today's story on Sunni romance is a beautiful reminder that sometimes real heroes do not wear capes. They wear old t-shirts and carry worn backpacks, proving that every child is uniquely intelligent and simply needs someone willing to look at them the right way. How did the story make you feel today? Have you ever met someone incredibly special like Avery in your own life? Someone who fiercely believed in you when the whole world completely doubted you? Or have you ever felt exactly like Maddie before someone finally showed you your true worth? Please share your beautiful story with us in the comments below, because we absolutely love reading them.